Thanks for staying with us. Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi says the AmaZulu royal family has pledged its support for the new king, Prince Misuzulu, kaZwelithini, who's officially now King Misuzulu, kaZwelithini. Let's talk more now on this particular story. We're joined by the Deputy Director of the Johannesburg Institute for Advanced Study, Dr. Bongani Mlunga. Thank you so much for your time. Certainly dramatic events that we saw yesterday. And then we move to today, which appears to now be a completely different scenario. And, you know, when you look at what happened yesterday, but I'd like us to just reverse back a little bit, because a lot of people, Dr. Nqulunga, who were watching on air last night were quite motivated by what they saw. We spoke to a cultural expert who said for him, while he's always heard about how hectic these succession battles become, watching it on air was the most difficult thing he's ever had to see. But you've written about it, and you've given us some perspective. Certainly doesn't look like what we saw last night was anything new for the royal family.
In fact, it was, well, thank you very much for inviting me. It was quite mild, I mean, when you look at it historically. I mean, there have been wars fought over succession in the history of the Zulu kingdom. There have been assassinations. I mean, over the past 205 years, since the Zulu kingdom was founded by Shaka Kasenza in 1816, there have been 8 Zulu kings. And whenever there is succession, there's been bitter contestation. I mean, as I have said, Shaka himself was assassinated by his two half-brothers. There was a war fought between King Dingane and his half-brother Mpande. Mpande's sons, Cechowayo and Mbuyazi, went to war again, I mean, fighting over succession. There have been cases where a king is declared and within 24 hours there is a reversal, I mean, because there's contestation within the royal family. So what happened yesterday was quite, well, I mean, it was quite dramatic, I mean, because over the past 50 years, I mean, since the recently deceased king took over the throne in December 1971, we got quite used to stability. I mean, most of us who watched what happened yesterday had never seen anything like it before. But, I mean, when you look at it in a historical perspective, actually, it was something a lot milder than what has happened in the past.
And some people were saying that we should have then seen the signals when he walked in fact, towards the marquee, where the memorial was then held, and that dramatic entrance with Amabuto. People were saying that the royal family should have then read it then and not even go as far as doing what they did last night.
Well, I mean, I think it was quite necessary because we have known now, I mean, since the last king, the 8th king, King Zwelithini Zulu, died over a month ago, that there was contestation in the royal house. And I think it was quite important that they went through that process. I mean, they have the will read out in public. I mean, because as I've said before, I mean, there have been 8 kings. I mean, in 2 cases, there were letters produced, I mean, to say, well, this is the person that the king preferred. I mean, so I think in the case yesterday, it was quite necessary for the Zulu royal house, especially for Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi as the traditional prime minister, to show not only the royal family but also the country and the world, I mean, that there's been a process, a legitimate process that has been gone through. But I mean, as I've said, there have been cases before where a king has been declared and there were challenges, and sometimes some of these things were overturned. So it's going to be quite interesting whether the unity that we see today is going to last. I mean, because it is quite clear that there are still members of the royal house who hold a different view.
And I wanted to ask you about that because when the Prime Minister was asked, he said then that he's heard that there are some people that were seeking legal advice, so he won't be surprised if the matter does end up in the courts. Would you then, your reading be that now they're talking about even the ones that we saw coming out, someone like Prince Mbonisi, someone like Princess Thembi, who are coming out in the week, just voicing their dissatisfaction about some of the processes that were unfolding in the days to come? Would your reading then be that as much as they put that in the back burner for now, could this matter then go away and they just decide to move on as the AmaZulu nation, or could we see a court battle here?
Well, I mean, I think it is quite possible that we can still have a court battle. I mean, one of the biggest problems, I think, with the Zulu royal house over the past 205 years is that there's not been an established principle of succession. And so any of the king's children really think that they could become king themselves. And if they think they have legitimate grounds to stake a claim to kingship, they can do so. I mean, fortunately in our case, there are courts. People can go to court, and put their case before the court, and the court makes a determination. But, I think what we saw yesterday and what has happened in history emphasizes the importance of establishing, in a sense, a principle or a rule or protocol of how succession has to happen. Because, there are a lot of claims that come, that if somebody's mother has royal blood and then automatically they become an heir, other people come with other things. But, if you look at it historically, actually, some even of those claims have been challenged. Whether the first son, of the first wife should become a king. There have been those claims before, which were successfully challenged. So I think if the Zulu royal house and the Zulu kingdom is to survive for another 100 years or 200 years, I think it is quite critical that the issue of how succession takes place needs to be resolved. The institution, I believe strongly, needs to be modernized. And if Prince Misuzulu, the heir apparent now, if he is confirmed by the state, because there is still that process, where the president has to issue a certificate of recognition. If that is done, I think one positive thing is that he's relatively a young man, well educated, was educated in the United States. Perhaps he will see the significance of addressing this issue of succession so that we do not see what we saw yesterday.
So from what you're saying, because then it appears that there hasn't really been then a clear path, as you say, and a clear principle, then we can't then rule out the argument that was made yesterday that there is a son, another son of the king, who's older than all the others, and some were saying that his name is Smagate, who then should ascend to the throne. So from what you're saying, I'm reading then that argument cannot necessarily then be thrown out at the moment.
Look, as I have said, that historically, whether somebody is the first son, if you take, the case, for instance, of Shaka himself, who's the founder of the Zulu kingdom, he was not even the eldest son. In fact, his father's preference was the son of the 8th wife. And so, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi was talking, for instance, about King Solomon being anointed, in 1913. His half-brother David had been suggested before. And those who were there said, Bayede, accepting him. And within 24 hours, that has changed. And there was even a government commission of inquiry trying to establish how does succession in the Zulu kingdom takes place. And that was not determined. So there are many claims that I think can still be made. What is significant about today, at least in my view, is that there are indications that the Zulu royal house is coming together. But I think in the future it cannot be guaranteed that matters will be settled within a day. Sometimes it has taken years for the issue of succession to be settled. It is quite critical that the institution modernizes and that it establishes a principle of succession if it is to survive without any major problems.
Let's talk then about that process, going forward now. He's inheriting a very divided nation, deeply divided. We saw in not only now, but we've been seeing and hearing of things bubbling under. How important will the unity that he was talking about yesterday in his address through his sister, how important is it going to be now for him to practice that?
It is going to be quite critical. You saw yesterday, what we saw in the news, that there is deep division inside the Zulu royal family. He will have to unite it, because it will be quite difficult for him to lead the nation if he has a divided royal house. And it is not a small house. It is quite a big house. It has always been a challenge, for Zulu kings, even to get the royal family behind them. And I think in his case, he'll have to do that. And then, of course, there are bigger issues about the nation as a whole. Because we live in a society that is changing. There are younger people, some of whom may not identify with the Zulu royal house itself, or even the notion of a Zulu kingdom. And as a young, educated person, he will have to make sure that the institution itself connects to young people, to a changing democratic society. But there are also opportunities. I mean, I think over the past 100 years, I don't think that the Zulu nation, in a sense, has been as united as it is. I mean, because what outraged quite a number of people who were watching what was happening yesterday, they didn't want it to happen. I mean, they want an heir to be chosen, somebody to become a king, and for the entire nation to rally behind that person. I think it is a huge opportunity that a lot of Zulu kings, past Zulu kings, have not enjoyed. He will have to use that opportunity to make sure that there is unity, firstly inside the royal house, as well as in the Zulu nation as a whole.
And another role that I saw, being a subject of either, lauding or criticism, has been the role of the Prime Minister of the Zulu monarch.
Yeah.
Some have said that it might be time for him to move aside and allow this, the royal household to continue. But others are saying then that he's actually the glue that has kept them together during this time. How important is his role going to be going forward, particularly during this transition phase?
It's going to be critical. I mean, if you look at the Zulu kingdom, especially in the past, 50, 60, 70 years, he's really the chief architect. I mean, just think about it. I mean, think about the Zulu kingdom 60 years ago. Probably not as influential and as powerful as it is today. And one of the main contributors towards what we see today, I mean, as a powerful, influential Zulu kingdom, is the current traditional Prime Minister, like Ibonot. And I just think that it is going to be quite critical, perhaps, to have him. I mean, he is quite old now, perhaps in a year or so, just to make sure that he assists the new king, I mean, to bring the family together. And of course, the new king has to choose his own traditional prime minister. But I think we have seen just over the past two months or so, since the death of the king, and how critical a role that Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi has played. And he had unique abilities, in a sense. I mean, that he was the first member from the heart of the Zulu royal family who was quite educated and yet a prince at the same time. He straddled two worlds, I mean, the world of the educated people, but also the world of the traditional Zulu royal house. And I think that served him well, and without him, it would have been difficult to have as influential and powerful a Zulu kingdom as we have had today. And I think if the new king chooses a prime minister, you'll have to think quite critically, because prime ministers have always played a huge role in the Zulu kingdom. And I think given all the challenges that we are talking about now, we'll need a prime minister who knows the institution very well, but who also knows the world. I mean, how to take the institution into the world so that it adapts, modernizes, while keeping that which we value as people, some people who are Zulus and who identify with the institution.
I tell you what, Dr. Ngulung, it sounds like this is not the last time you and I speak, because this is a story that is going to unfold for quite some time. But I'd like to thank you so much for your time and the insights that you've shared with us tonight. That's Dr. Bongani Ngulunga there, who's the Deputy Director of the Johannesburg Institute for Advanced Studies.